Hello everybody and welcome to another video lesson. For today's lab, we're going to solve a simple programming challenge in C++. It is the draw an upside down triangle with stars lab. I'll go over the contents of the lab here before we start with it. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So the description is to create a program that asks the user how many rows of an upside down triangle they want to draw. And then it contains a sample of the output for the number 5 and the number 4. And the thing to notice with the samples is that one of those numbers is odd and the other number is even. Okay, so that might be something. The software requirements are for us to create a function called user input that is responsible for restricting the user's input to the range of 3 to 10. We must create another function called draw spaces that is responsible for drawing the appropriate number of spaces for any given row, and another function called draw stars that does the same thing but draws the number of stars instead of spaces correctly for any given row. And that is it for requirements. So when you approach problems like this, I think the best thing to do is maybe read it a couple times to isolate exactly what's being asked of you. So for example, with the function called user input, it could be a little bit confusing to think, oh, well, does it need to be a Boolean? Is it supposed to help with this process? No, it says that it is responsible for restricting the input. So it is wholly responsible for doing this task. So it must restrict the user's input to integers 3 to 10. And then you can detail, what kind of goes into something like that. Well, whatever the user puts, if it's not within the range, then we should, either quit the program or prompt the user to try again. I think you have a very small amount of liberty with that, but not too much. And then the other two functions are a little bit self-explanatory, except for the process of determining, all right, well, what is the appropriate number of spaces? What is the appropriate number of spaces of stars? So before we do any of this, I think we should kind of look into how we're going to determine the number of spaces and the number of stars. So I'm going to, once again, kind of gloss over this. So where it says enter number of rows and it says 5, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows. That's correct. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 stars in the top, and then 7 in the next row, and then 5 in the next, 3 in the next, and 1 in the next. So it looks like whatever's happening, everything is decreasing, or at least not, the number of stars is decreasing, and the number of spaces before the stars increases. And the same can be said about when we enter the number 4. So we'll count here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in the top row, 5 in the next row, 3 in the next, and 1. And it follows the same pattern. It looks like we go from 7 to 5 to 3 to 1, where it's a reduction of 2 each time. And then we'll dive a little further into this. Let me pull up what I have. So I have a file, I have a folder open in Visual Studio, and I have some pictures that I saved in here. I'll go ahead and I'll zoom in on these right now. So we have, I wrote this down a little haphazardly. So I'll read it out loud. Write out the pattern for a small example is what this is meant to say. This is a colon here. Words did not get cut off. This is a colon. And then the usernum. And then I put a 5. I noted that it's an odd number. I wrote a column for rows, a column for stars, and a column for spaces. And this is going to help me identify patterns. And when we're doing projects that kind of have a pattern to their output, problems like the cube, like you guys did for exam 2, and I think there's some online problems that you could work on, like output a Christmas tree. When you do projects like that that require a specific output, I think coming up with a chart of some kind to show an example of observations from a small input for the problem. You don't want to do this for a large input. You're going to be writing for a long time. It'll be a little harder to see the pattern. But if we keep the numbers small, like 5 and 4, then that's big enough to see a pattern happening, but not small enough that it's not expressive enough. Like we didn't look at 3 because it might not be big enough to show an expressive pattern. So I wrote down the column for rows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We should have 5 rows. And then I wrote the number of stars that we observed in each row. So in the first row for user input equals 5, we had 9 stars. And there were no spaces. So I'll go ahead and I'll reference here. So we had 9 stars, no spaces. And then in row 2, we had 7 stars. And then if we look carefully here, you're going to see that there is actually 1 space. If you kind of drop the icon a little bit, you can see that there's 1 space there. And then for row number 3, 5 stars with 2 spaces. And again, it's just done by carefully kind of mousing over those 2 to see that. And then as we continue, we do start to see a pattern, right? So the number of spaces for the first row is 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. Okay, so it looks like it starts at 0 and increments by 1 each time. And then if we look at the number of stars, we have a number. We start at a number. We're going to talk about how we get to this number in a moment, but it looks like we have a larger number that decreases by 2 at each iteration. So for every row, we decrease by 2. And notice that the number of stars are all odd numbers. So that could be something too. Scroll a little bit down so you can see the same thing done for even numbers here. So the row number was 1. When we had 1, we had 7 stars. Okay, so I wrote down 7, and then we have 0 spaces to start with. And then the same pattern shows up. So the next row, we have 5 stars, an extra space. You look here again, okay, 1 space. And then the next row gives us 2 spaces, 3 stars, and so on and so forth. Okay, so there's still a couple questions that we have. So the part about the spaces is a little bit easier to interpret, right? Start at 0, increment by 1 each time. Okay, I think we could do something like that with a for loop, right? We can start at some number and then increase by 1 each time. That sounds like the job for a for loop. But then we look at the number of stars, and the number of stars isn't as simplistic. It looks like it starts at some number, some odd number, that decreases by 2 each time. So I did create another image to help us bridge that gap. So I have a small, I guess, upside down triangle written by really hilariously drawn asterisks. I do get a little bit lazy in drawing some of these. But the idea is that, okay, so our first line for number 4 was 7 stars. And then what's a way we can get to 7 from 4? And, okay, so 4 plus 3 is 7, right? All right. And 4 times 2 is 8 minus 1 gives us 7 as well. Okay, so we go to the next line. All right, the next line is 5. How do we get 5 from the input 4? So you can try the same pattern that you did before, except decrease this number here by 1, and then you get the same thing. You get a 5. So 3 times 2 minus 1 is 5. And then you can continue this. Okay, 2 times 2 minus 1, that's 3. 1 times 2 minus 1. So it looks like we're doing some sort of a multiplication by 2, and subtracting by 1 to get an odd number each time. And this is kind of done by playing with patterns. Sometimes I kind of just like check to see, like try different things until we get kind of something that makes a little bit of sense. And, you know, part of this is trial and error, but part of it is kind of identifying patterns that are a little stronger. Like, for example, with the first row, every time we had the stars for the first row, we always had 0 spaces, so I didn't have to worry about that. And then we always had twice the size of the user number, whatever they put -1, and it was like that for the 5 and the 4. So if we wanted to continue that pattern, how would we achieve it with the rest of the rows? And that's kind of what went into figuring this part out. Okay, so now that we have kind of figured out how we're going to do the math behind the number of stars and the number of spaces, we can move on to writing some code. So notice how we hadn't done any coding yet. We just wanted to focus on the problem solving part. Okay, so I'm going to create a file. It's going to be called main.cpp, and we're going to do some standard boilerplate stuff. We're going to include IOStream for the user, to get the user's input and to do some output. And then we'll do string, so we could do some string manipulations. And then we want to be in the namespace. I'm going to create our main. This will be our entry point. Return 0, and then I saved that. So from here, I think that we can work on the part of the code that kind of makes the most sense, which is just prompting the user to enter a number of rows and then getting the user number. Okay, oops. And so for this, we will say, we'll just call it user num, and then we will say get the user output. Input. I got confused because we're outputting to the user, but we're getting their input. Declarations. And then we say cout, enter number of rows. And then let's reference the lab again, enter number of rows. That's the correct lingo. And then we say cin user num. Okay, so once we have this prompt, the next part of our code is going to do the binding. So this is gonna be the user, the function that we're calling user input. So this function, let's go ahead and read what it's supposed to do again, to just review, function that is responsible for restricting the user's input to integers from 3 to 10. Okay, so let's think for a moment, right? We want to figure out, okay, is this going to return anything? Is it going to have a return type? What exactly do we want the user input function to do? Okay, well, we want to restrict what the user number is. If it's not what we want, we could either close the program, and that would be fine if you implement your code that way, or we can prompt the user again and make something a little more robust, and then get a user number, get another user number, and then evaluate that, and then continue until we get the required range that we're asking for. And I think we're going to go with that option. So something like that doesn't have to return anything. It's going to be a void function, and it's supposed to be called user input int. It's going to take an integer. It's going to take the user num. And I want you to notice that we are passing in user num by reference. We want to, like I said, prompt the user for the for a number that's in the right range. And as we're prompting it, we want to change the value of user num to whatever the corrected version is when it is correct. And to do this, we want to edit that variable directly. We don't want to edit a copy of it. We want to edit that actual variable. And that's why we're going to use this little ampersand here to indicate that we are going to pass that in by reference. So I'll say while. This part's kind of easy, right? It's get user num in the range that we want. We're going to use a while loop to prompt the user to confine the number between 3 and 10, and then see in that user num that they enter in. So this isn't too bad. So we'll do this while, while user num is smaller than 3, so that would be out of range, and that would be too small. And if user num is greater than 10, which would be too big and is out of our range, we're going to prompt them, cout, confine the number between 3 and 10, right? And then cin user num. So what this is going to do is, while the requirements are not met, prompt the user to enter the user num within the correct range. And this is a void. It's not returning anything. It's a void type. And that should do it. This should do exactly what we want it to do. So I'll go ahead and I will say user input here. We'll say user input and then user num. And then we'll save what we have for now. And this should work. This should work. This is fine. Okay, so the next part of our code, we want to identify how we're going to draw spaces and draw stars. So let's think for a minute. We know that we want to use a for loop, right? Because we know when we want to terminate the loop. We want to start somewhere and then terminate at the user num. That would produce the correct number of iterations. If the user number enters 5, we want to do 5 rows. So we want to do this 5 times. It's not going to be a while loop because it's not a condition that will stop us. We want to use a for loop because we know how many times we want to do this. So I'll go ahead and I'll start doing that. So we'll say for, and then let me give this a little section header. This will be the calculation and output portion. And it is going to be a for loop that starting I at 0. So why in the world would we start I at 0? Let's think about this strategically. Remember when we saw, remember when we saw that at first the number of spaces we want to draw is 0. And that this is simply going to increment by 1. So this is perfect for the for loop. So because we don't want any spaces drawn at the beginning, I think we should start our for loop at 0. So that's what we're going to do. And then we want to create the condition I less than user num and increase I by 1 each time. Okay, and then the thing we want to do each time is we want to call draw spaces and we want to call draw stars. So we'll say draw spaces. We haven't defined these yet. We will define them. So this is going to produce an error first, and then we're going to say draw stars. And then for now, we'll just put I as the, well, actually, let's also include user number in the draw stars part. Because remember, the draw spaces part only increments by 1 each time. And if we take I, which starts at 0, goes to 1, 2, 3, however many times it needs to go till it gets to the user number, this would make it, this would make this enough. Right? We don't need any other information besides whatever I is at that current iteration. But with draw stars, not only do we need whatever I is, we're going to need whatever the user number is. Because when we did the math, when we found the math, we're using user number in some way, right? We know that we're going to use it in some way here. So that's how we're going to do it. And if in your problem solving, you don't always have the right parameters, as you move through the code, sometimes you realize, you know what, I actually do need this number. Sometimes things don't always come up during the planning phase, and that's just kind of natural, but try to plan as much of it as you can. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and write out some functions. So these functions do not have a return type. They are void. So draw spaces will take an integer called I, and we also have draw stars. Copy this here. It is also void. It's meant to print its output to the console. Draw stars, and then this is of course an integer, and then the user is also supposed to just put in an integer. And then we have something here. So let's work on the easier of the two, and that would be draw spaces. So all we need is to create a way to output I number of spaces, where I is the current iteration of the for loop. So it starts at 0, 1, 2, 3, however many times it needs to go till user num. So to do that, let's create a string, and we can call it output, and we will do a string manipulation. So this is the name. It's going to be called output, and then in parentheses, we're going to say I, comma, and then a space. Now what this is doing is it's taking however many times, in this case I, and then repeating this character on the right. And this character is simply a space. So you can kind of see it right here. So that's what this string manipulation is intended to do. And then we output it. That's it. That's what draw spaces is supposed to do. When we move on to draw stars, I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult, but let's go ahead and try. Okay, so to do this, let's go ahead and look at our calculation that we came up with. So it looks like it is user num times 2 minus 1. And the minus 1 part is constant. So whatever math we use is probably going to contain this, just the minus 1 at some point. The times 2, once again, that's also constant. We do that every time, so that's probably going to be part of the math. This 4, 3, 2, 1, this descending order here, this part is going to require a little bit of manipulation, but it looks like it starts here at user num, and it gets smaller by 1 each time. So to do this, let's see, draw stars. We're going to create a variable that tells us stars. We're going to call it stars to draw. And we're going to have this is going to store an integer. And we're going to use something similar to what we did with draw spaces, but this time we want to find where it's not going to be I, it's going to be however many stars to draw happens to be based on the math that we use. And then it's going to do spaces. So I'm going to say, let's go ahead and do that for now. We're going to see out, we're going to have a string, and then it's going to be called output as well. We could do this is fine. And then it's going to be stars to draw many times, this star character, this asterisk. Okay. And then we're going to go back in. We're going to think for a minute. So we said we want to minus 1. That makes sense. And we said we want to multiply by 2 each time, right? And let's go back to that calculation. Okay, we're going to have user num, and we're going to subtract user num by some value each time, a value that is increasing as the loop increases. Let's think about that for a second. That should be I, right? I is increasing by 1 each time. It's getting bigger by 1 each time. We can subtract by I. So let's try that. So we will say user num minus I. So now user num is going to decrease more and more each time by I. And then remember, we want to multiply it by 2. And then we already figured out, okay, subtract by 1 every time. And then this should produce the correct number of stars. All right, so after we do this, we will say cout output, and then this will have an end line because we want to go to the next line after the stars are drawn. You don't need to output a specific number of spaces after the stars, just before them. So this should work. Okay, so now I'm going to run the code. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to go open up a new terminal. I'm going to do g++ main.cpp. We only have this file that we're going to include in the compilation process. We're going to include the switch for debugging, -d, compiling, and I'm going to call it aout. And again, I mentioned previously, aout is kind of just like the default name for the executable file. So I'm going to press enter, and it looks like everything worked out. So I'm going to run this by pressing .\aout, which is the name of my executable. I'm going to press enter. And let me see if I can make this a little bigger. This part might be a little small for you guys. I'm so sorry if it is. Enter number of rows, and press 5. And it successfully entered the number of rows here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I am also going to run it again, and this time I'm going to enter 2, which is too small. It gives me confine the number between 3 and 10. I'm going to press 11, which is too big, and it prompts me again to enter a number between 3 and 10. So I will pick 4. I hit enter, and successfully 1, 2, 3, 4, perfect upside down triangle. That's going to do it for this lab, and I hope that this helps to explain things. If it doesn't, if you have questions, if you watch this and you're left with questions about what's happening, just go ahead and shoot me a message, and I will respond to you as soon as I can. You're always free to ask questions. But that's going to conclude this lab. So thank you so much for listening, and have a wonderful day.